Questions during Supervisor Simitian's talk, please submit any questions you have to the chat, and we'll try to get those questions asked before he leaves us. After his talk, we're going to do breakout rooms. And after the breakout rooms, we have our own Gita Dev is going to have a presentation about the city planning process and how we can get involved in that process. After that, we'll have a little bit of a group discussion if time permits. So with that, I'm going to ask James Edgars to first introduce himself and then introduce Supervisor Simitian.
There we go, to be unmuted. Thank you, Susan. My name is James Edgars. I'm the chapter director for the Loma Prieta chapter. It means I'm the chief staff person, and we have a staff of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 now. 2 of them working almost full-time on our Bay campaign. And I'm delighted this evening to introduce someone that I've known for only a few years, but felt like he's a longtime friend, Supervisor Joe Simitian. I'll read you the official biography that Joe Simitian is the county supervisor for the 5th district of Santa Clara County. His district includes Palo Alto, Mountain View, Cupertino, Stanford, Los Altos Hills, and Saratoga, along with portions of Sunnyvale and San Jose. He was elected to the Board of Supervisors in 2012, was reelected in 2016 and in 2020. Joe's public service over the years includes stints as a member of the California State Senate, California State Assembly, Mayor of Palo Alto, President of the Palo Alto School Board, and an earlier term on the Santa Clara County Board of Supervisors. Joe brings to his work a wide-ranging perspective and background, service at all levels of state and local governments, hands-on experience in the private sector, as well as professional education and training, particularly applicable to his work in public service. In addition to that, I would add that Joe is probably the nicest elected official you'll ever meet, and one of the nicest people in general that you will ever meet. And after his presentation, I'm sure you'll want to know a little bit more about him. So you can check out our chapter's website, because Joe was our Guardians of Nature honoree in 2018. So he's up in the top constellation with those like Pete McCluskey and Byron Schur and Lenny Roberts and Enid Pearson and Emily Renzel. And we're very delighted to have him speak to us tonight. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you very much, and good evening, Sierra Club folk, wherever you may be as we do this virtually. And I'm only going to add by way of additional biography that I am a life member of the Sierra Club, and that part of the conversation tonight is informed by the fact that I spent 7 years as the chair of the Senate Environmental Quality Committee while I served in the California State Legislature. So we're going to jump right in because we have a lot to cover. And our goal here in the next 45 minutes to an hour is to make all of us more effective advocates on behalf of the things we believe in, and obviously by definition with the Sierra Club on issues of importance to our climate and our planet. So we're going to jump right in. I am going to ask you to be good sports about participating, and I may ask you to take your mute buttons off because this is a little interactive and it'll be more fun and more useful if as I ask you do that. And I'm going to start by just asking you to raise your real hands if you are a person with good values. So everybody with good values, please raise your hand. Sheila, you were a little slow there. I'm a little nervous about that, but I've got my eye on you now. So then the next question is, how many of us have ever been disappointed that our government at some level failed to reflect or respect the good values we brought into the debate? Yeah, see, and again, hands up right away, because all of us have been in that time and place where we wondered, hey, how come what are such obviously good values are not being represented and respected in a particular forum. So our goal, as I say, is to make sure that we walk away from this exercise more fully informed about how to be effective advocates. And let me just confirm with you that James got you either digitally or hard copy a one-pager called 13 Tips for Successful Advocacy. Can I see a couple of thumbs up if you've gotten this document? Okay, we got it. Thanks, Sue. Appreciate that. What we're going to do is we're just going to march right through and ask you to hold your questions till we get to the end. But tip number one is develop a relationship before you arrive. And, you know, a relationship doesn't mean a lifelong relationship necessarily. It means, you know, it could be a year, it could be an hour, it could be just a 15-minute phone call. But if you want to be a successful advocate, it helps to have developed some kind of relationship before you arrive in the office of your state senator or at the podium at a city council or planning commission meeting. And I'm just going to give you a very obvious example. I see Terry Moore popping up on the screen. Hi, Terry, how are you? I don't think Terry and I have ever met before. And so, Terry, if I was that guy on the weekend who walked up to you at the gas station and said, "Excuse me, ma'am, I know I'm in my blue jeans and I've a t-shirt, I've been working at home in the yard, and I'm really embarrassed, but I seem to have misplaced my wallet and I'm running on fumes. I wonder if I can borrow $20 from you, Terry. And you know, if you give me your name and address, I promise I will send it back." Now, Terry is already laughing at this pitch because she's not going to go there in all probability. And I'm looking at a bunch of skeptical faces on the screen. And the reason that that's not going to happen is because we don't have any kind of a relationship. I have literally approached her cold at the gas station and asked her to trust me. And that's a hard thing. She doesn't know me, she doesn't know anything about me. We have no relationship. If, on the other hand, I saw James, who gave me that, you know, very fulsome introduction. Thank you, James. If I saw James, I'd say, "James, how are you? It's good to see you. Listen, I am so embarrassed, my friend, but I have left my wallet at home and I really need to get on the road and I'm running on fumes. Can I borrow $20? And I promise I will mail it back to you." James is going to say, I'm not going to give him a chance to say otherwise. James is going to say, "Of course, Joe, here's 20. Do you need 40? And I'm going to say, "I'll get it right back to you, I promise." And he knows that's going to happen. Why? Because we have a relationship. We've worked together. He knows something about me. He knows that I'm a truthful person. I'm good for my word. He also knows that I'm an elected official and that if I don't give him the $20 back, he can badmouth me in my district. You know, so in all seriousness, I mean, knowing something about the person you're working with makes you a more effective advocate. So you always want to develop, even if it's just a 15-minute phone call or an email exchange, develop some kind of relationship before you walk in the room, before you walk up to the microphone. And now let me just ask again for a show of hands, how many of you have spoken to a public body or agency, a city council, a school board? Okay, many of you. Think back to that first time when you walked up to a microphone at a podium, and you may have been a little bit nervous. And you may even recall that as you walked up to the microphone in the city council or the school board or the planning commission, heads turned and people went, pss, 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 pss. And you're wondering, what are they talking about? I'm going to tell you what they said. What they said is, "Who is that? I don't know them. Do you know them?" Because you may have been a little bit nervous walking up to the microphone, but they're really nervous because they're stuck in those chairs and they don't know who you are and they don't know why you're coming there. And they're pretty sure, based on experience, that it's not to thank them for the good work they do or to compliment them. What they know is that most people come to those meetings to complain or demand something, and they're nervous. You may find that surprising, but they're nervous. Now imagine how differently that goes if you've developed the beginnings, at least, of a relationship by calling or sharing an email, because then when you walk up and somebody turns their head to go, pss, 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 when they say, "Who is that? What's she here about?" They're going to say, "Oh, I think that's Adriana. I talked to her earlier today. She seemed like a really smart person with good thoughts. I'm so glad she came to share them with our council because we could use her help on this issue." Very different reaction than when you show up cold. Same story if you travel to Sacramento. You know, I remember years ago when I would turn to the person on my staff who was bringing in a group and I'd say, "Now remind me again who these folks are." Well, the answer differed. Sometimes it was, you remember, Senator, these are the folks we worked with so well on the thus and such issue. Oh, good, great. We already have that relationship. I know that they're people who are smart, people with good values, people who are going to tell the truth, people who are going to follow up on their commitments in terms of advocacy. Or it could be that the person who's walking you in has to say, you know, I don't know, we've tried to reach out to them 3 times, they never get back to us, but we agreed to the meeting, so we'll see how it goes. That's going to be a very different conversation depending on whether or not we have that relationship. So, you know, I am hoping that now if I bump into Terry at the gas station, she's going to be good for the 20 if I need it. And we've developed a little bit of a relationship, even if it's just here online. But you want to have that kind of starter, even if it can't be deeper, when you go to an office or up to the microphone. Now, tip number 2 is understand what motivates your audience. And by that, I mean the elected official or his or her staff, and then tell them why they care about your issue. And, you know, I asked if you were all people with good values, and I knew you would be because you're in a Sierra Club program. But here's the thing we know. Whatever brings us to somebody's office to be an advocate, whatever takes us to the microphone at the council meeting or the planning commission meeting, those are our good values. But we know that by definition, the folks we're trying to persuade have a different set of values. So, you know, I used to sit on the Palo Alto City Council years ago, and at the time we had 9 council members. And if I walked in the room before I was on the council to persuade them, I knew that I needed at least 5 votes. So let's say that, you know, Andy and Virginia and Susan and Winfred and Kathy and John C. And I believe it's Regina and Lindsay and Agnes are all city council members. And I want to pitch them for funding for a recycling center because I think we got to stop thinking of this as a disposable planet, and a recycling center will help us get to a better place. And I know I'm there because of my green values, but the first thing I have to ask is not, am I right? Not, are my values good? I have to say, what motivates them? I want Annie's vote. I need her to allocate funding for this recycling center. What motivates her and Virginia and Susan and on? And here's what I have discovered about this 9-member imaginary city council. The good news is Annie and Virginia and Susan are on my green team. So I'm feeling pretty good about getting at least their 3 votes. But then I'm thinking, I need 2 more. Where do the next 2 come from? And then I remember, and Winifred, do you go by Winifred or going to go by, okay. So Winifred, you know, it turns out Winifred is really big on kids in schools. And so I say to myself, aha, she may not be quite as green as the others, but if I remember to tell her that this is a program that not only recycles, but has after-school internships for high school and middle school students in the community, then all of a sudden I've got her engaged because she cares about the kids. And then I remember, oh yeah, council member Kathy Down. She's the crusty fiscal conservative on this city council. Oh man, it's always about the money with Kathy Down. So I'm going to remember to say to Kathy, council member, you know, I know you think of this as an expenditure, but really it's an investment because we can't keep throwing this stuff away, because if we do, we're going to have to schlep it halfway to hell and gone to put it in a dump. And that's going to mean we have to pay tipping fees every time that we dump our garbage at the dump. And by the way, it means we're going to have to pay for somebody to drive it down there and pay all the fuel costs to get them there. And by the way, even though the recycling market's softened, you know, we will get paid something for these recyclables. So I hope you see that we're going to actually have cost avoidance plus some revenue as a result of this program. And it's really makes a lot of sense from a fiscal standpoint. And now all of a sudden you can see Kathy's like, oh, okay, I hadn't thought of it that way. Now I got a nodding head there. And then Winifred's over there thinking, well, and it's good for the kids. And I take my 5th vote and my 4th vote with those first 3 votes, and I've got 5 votes on a 9-member council, even though only 3 of them were certifiably green going in, because we asked ourselves not what motivated us, but what motivated them. We got to convince them. If we speak only from our own values, The only people we'll persuade are people who already agree with us. And that's not what we need. And, I say that it could be, about some other policy issue like kids in schools or like financial issues, but maybe it's, with John C., maybe John's got a little ego need going on there. He wouldn't be the first elected official who wanted to feel like he was a somebody. So we might say, and by the way, Council Member John C., your colleagues tell me that you're really the one that they look to and listen to, and hey, look, John's believing me. Okay, he's taking that at face value, and all of a sudden we realize, okay, if the thing that motivates him is his ego, that's a real thing that we have to confront and deal with, and say, all right, let's make sure John C. doesn't feel like he's left out. Better still, let's make him feel like he's indispensable. And then there's Regina Gilligan, who, Regina, look, I know that you're running for re-election in November, and it's a little busy for you at the end of October. But if we could persuade you to come to the ribbon cutting, which is like, I don't know, maybe a week before the re-election, if you could come to the ribbon cutting, and I know it's an imposition, Regina, but if you could talk to maybe 300 or 400 of your constituents, did I mention it was a week before the election? And, if you could maybe even stick around for another half hour, because we are going to have 2 different newspapers and 3 TV cameras and 2 radio stations who are there. Look, if Regina is worried about her reelection, that's a political motivator we have to be mindful of. And I'm not suggesting anybody do anything or say anything that's inappropriate or disingenuous, but I'm saying everybody's motivated by different things. So with Annie and Virginia and Susan, we thought, good, we're on solid ground making our case on the merits environmentally. With Winifred, we needed to pull in that kids in schools piece. With Kathy, we needed to talk dollars and cents. With John, we had to remember that, we needed to make him feel like he was an important part of this decision. With Regina, it may be her political context. Lindsay and Agnes, you're not off the hook yet, so we'll pull you back in here in a minute. But again, ask yourself what motivates your audience, and then tell them why they should care about the thing that you care about so deeply. And tip number 3 is understand what is possible and what is not. And you're probably saying, well, what does that mean? Well, it means just what it says, which is you will be disappointed and largely unsuccessful as an advocate if you ask for things that just can't be done. And I'm not talking about defying the laws of physics. If you're asking for money that doesn't exist, or something that is wholly at odds with the political reality of the place and space where you're trying to do your work, you're going to be disappointed. I had the challenge of being in the state legislature during the mini recession of the early 2000s and then the Great Recession in 2009. Well, people would come to me with great ideas. I had something called There Ought to Be a Law, which was an annual contest to solicit ideas for legislation. And people would send great ideas, but we'd have to very politely call or email and say, really a wonderful idea. I'm sorry, Samantha Smith, it costs $3 billion a year and we don't have it. We're cutting $20 billion this year. And so that was just a non-starter for money reasons. Or you might say to, Council Member Lindsay, why won't you carry this? I know you agree with me. And she might say, because I've carried it 4 years in a row and it goes down to flames 8-1 every single year. It's just a non-starter. Now, that doesn't mean you couldn't suggest a pilot program that might get Samantha's idea moving a little bit until we have more money. Doesn't mean you should give up. You talk to Lindsay about how do we get people who share our views and our values elected at the next election. But asking people to do things that are, virtually impossible is a disappointment in the making. So ask yourself what's possible and what's not. And, there's some basic questions, and some of you will smile, but, ask yourself, is it legal? People used to give suggestions for legislation, and I'd have to very politely say, well, I'm sorry, that's a great idea, except for the fact that it's unconstitutional. Or that's a great idea, except it's preempted at the federal level. And then another question is, am I in the right place talking to the right people who can actually affect this outcome? I remember long ago, I was in a children's theater we have here in my hometown in Palo Alto, and it was an unseasonably hot day. And it was a facility that did not have air conditioning, and the kids are literally dripping sweat down the side of their faces as they perform for their friends and family and parents. And the makeup is running and all the parents are sort of puffing their shirts and it's hot. And as we leave the children's theater, I remember everybody saying, Joe, you're on the school board, for gosh sakes, why can't we get some air conditioning here? And I had to say, Gita, I'm sorry, but I'm on the school board. This is a city facility. You need to talk to the city council members so that they can put the air conditioning in. Because as a school board member, I'm not empowered to do that. They were talking to the wrong person from the wrong body. And by the way, the punchline on this story is that later on I was on the city council and today there is air conditioning at the Palo Alto Children's Theater. But that's the happily ever after part of the story. But my point again is, is it legal? Is it financially possible? Is it politically possible? Are you talking to the right people in the right venue? And again, I'm not asking you to shelve your notions of what you want to accomplish. I'm just asking you to be savvy about that. And that takes us to tip number 4, which is find a floor manager. Now, what does that term mean? In the legislature, it means something very specific. So I was both a state assembly member and a state senator. If you're a state assembly member, you don't get to go present your bill after it's passed in the assembly on the floor of the Senate. And if you're a state senator, you don't get to present your bill on the floor of the state assembly. You have to ask somebody who is in that body to be your floor manager, literally to take up your bill on the floor of their house and try and get their colleagues to support it. And that's frustrating sometimes because you know your issue better than anyone else. They may not be as passionate, they may not be as hardworking, they may not be as committed to the issue, but you need their help to make the case there. Now, in the context of community activism, what we know is there's a moment that is really very dangerous at any city council meeting, and that's after you have walked up, let's say it's Bob Sublet, and he's walked up to the microphone, he's made his case, he's hoping for a good outcome, but here's the thing. Nobody up there knows the issue as well as Bob does. And we think that if we just throw these issues up there, they're going to figure them out. And regrettably, it doesn't work that way. And Bob, I'm going to prove that to you all right now, because before we get to the substance, I'm going to do something that'll seem a little bit silly. I call it the 9-person pizza problem. Before the meeting where they're taking up Bob's very important issue, they're going to have a closed session for confidential items, just an hour, and they're going to grab a quick bite to eat. And we're going to get pizza just to keep it inexpensive and simple. And we're going to get 1 extra large pizza. And we're just going to ask the council members what kind of pizza they want. So Annie and Virginia and Susan and Winifred and Kathy and John and Regina and Lindsay and Agnes, please unmute yourselves because I want to take your order for this. This is the 9 council members who are going to tell us, Annie, what kind of pizza do you want? Annie Gresham.
Yes, I'll take a cheese pizza.
Cheese pizza. Turns out she was the fiscally conservative one. She doesn't want any fixing. She just wants a cheese pizza, bare bones. Virginia, what kind of pizza do you want?
Black olive and artichoke hearts.
Black olive and artichoke hearts. Not too particular or specific, are we, Virginia? And then what about Susan? What kind of pizza do you want?
The Veggie Lovers Special.
Veggie Lovers Special. Okay, Winifred?
I want eggplant and green olives.
Let me just point out, every council has one of these people on it, okay? That's what there's always one who's got some order like this. All right, how about you, Kathy?
Oh, I'm going to be difficult. I'm going to go for anchovy.
Anchovies, okay. I'm guessing Kathy is at the wrong end of a lot of 8-to-1 votes on this council. How about you, John C?
Sausage and mushroom.
Sausage and mushroom. Regina?
Mushroom and olive.
Mushroom and olive. Lindsay?
Mushroom.
Mushroom. Agnes?
Vegetarian.
Vegetarian. All right. Thank you all very much. Bob, the reason I put you through that and all the rest of us is because I wanted to make a point here, which is what could be easier than picking out a pizza? And the answer is, no disrespect, these 9 people have no idea how to get to yes on a pizza. But I think one of them or more probably could and would get to yes if we asked them to. So we pick somebody to be that somebody, the floor manager, the person who's going to accept responsibility. and he or she can lean forward and say, well, wait a minute, why do we have to get one extra large? Why can't we get two larges? And wait a minute, they'll give us half and half. So why don't we get half of this and half of that? And by the way, there are a couple of people there who wanted mushroom, and we had the one with cheese. And Annie, if you want cheese pizza, great. Just pick off the toppings. It'll be easy for you, I promise. Okay, it's not that hard. And all of a sudden, we've got the problem solved. But Bob, what did it take? It took somebody to be that somebody, to lean in and do that. And again, no disrespect, but you just toss a pizza order to these 9 people, and they're going to be going around the table all night long about what kind of pizza it should be. But if you say, hey, would you accept some responsibility to craft a solution? And somebody takes that responsibility on, now we've got a chance at some progress. So imagine now that we're a little more serious, and Bob is the neighborhood association president where a big project is coming up, and he's very concerned about it. And the one thing he knows is that none of these 9 council members, as good as they all are, lives in his neighborhood, has familiarity with his neighborhood, or has studied this project as much as he has, because they have other things that they're responsible for. So what he needs to do is he needs to find at least one of these folks he can go to and say, you know, Regina, I would really appreciate it if you would accept the responsibility to make sure we get heard on this issue, that the right questions get asked and answered, and that you call anybody if they misrepresent the facts. And hopefully Regina will say yes to that, Bob, because the scariest moment in any meeting is when Madam Mayor, Kathy Down, leans forward and says, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, that completes the public hearing. The public hearing is now closed. The matter is back before the council for debate, deliberation, and possible action this evening. Bob, that is parliamentary speak for sit down and be quiet. You had your turn. Now the rest of us get to talk, and we are the deciders. And as sure as you and I are looking at each other on this screen, here's what's going to happen next. Susan is going to lean forward and say, well, you know, I'm very concerned, Madam Mayor, about these 22,000 trips. And guess what? It's not 22,000 trips. It's 222,000 trips over the course of the year. And she has misread it. Now, fortunately, Regina is your floor manager, and she's going to lean forward and say, well, excuse me, Madam Mayor, but I think if Council Member Susan Desjardins will take a look at the first sentence on the first paragraph on the first page of the staff report, she'll see that it's actually 222,000 trips over the course of the year. Susan's given me the hairy eyeball here, like, I read my reports. Come on, Joe, be fair. I know you do, Susan, but there's always somebody who doesn't, Bob. And you can't stand up and rush the microphone. You need somebody up there to be sure to correct any misstatements, to have read the material carefully enough. You need somebody to be your advocate. I call them your floor manager. Don't just assume that because this issue is important to you, these 9 people will have had a chance to look carefully at the same material. And remember, Bob, the developer will also have done the same thing. The developer will have gone to Winifred because he knows she's a housing advocate, and he's going to say, now, Winifred, we're going to get a bunch of these neighborhood folks who aren't going to want the project. They're going to say there's too much traffic. I need you to stand up for people who need housing who aren't here in the meeting. And Winifred will say, okay, I'll be that person. And then at least we know that there are a couple of folks here who are going to help make the case in an informed, effective way, because not everybody will be as engaged as you need or want them to be. You have to have a floor manager, somebody to be your voice, to carry your message. You can't just toss it up there and hope that these complicated issues get sorted out if somebody isn't prepared to lean in and do it effectively. Now, tip number 5 is the Joe Jackson principle. And I'm just curious here. If I said singer-songwriter Joe Jackson, show of hands, does anybody know who I'm talking about? Well, Meg, I think you and I might be it on this group. So for those of you who don't know, British singer-songwriter Joe Jackson, wonderful, wonderful song, at least I think so. One of my favorite Joe Jackson tunes, Meg, is "You Can't Get What You Want Till You Know What You Want." Meg's nodding, she knows the song. That's the title. You can't get what you want till you know what you want. And that is tip number 5. You have to know what you want when you walk in the room. You can't get what you want till you know what you want. So ask yourself, I mean, hopefully we didn't show up just to vent. Hopefully we didn't show up just to sort of use the moment as therapy. Hopefully we showed up because there's something we're really trying to accomplish. And you need to sort of ask yourself, what is that thing? And then you need to tell them, because they're not mind readers. And every elected official at, certainly at the full-time level, will have had the experience of turning to their staff member and saying, what's the ask? A-S-K, what's the ask? Meaning, what is it that Sheila Brady wants? What's her ask? And if she doesn't tell us, we can't say yes to it. And I want to tell you quite sincerely, over the years, I've been, as you heard, a school board member, a city council member, a county supervisor, a state assembly member, a state senator, and I have probably had, hundreds, if not thousands of people testify, certainly if we include the number of folks who've come to my office to meet. And there's nothing more painful than watching someone just cry their heart out, literally, or pound the podium, and they're sad, they're angry, but when they walk away after their 2 or 3 minutes, you think to yourself, I have no idea what they want, which means you can't give them what they want. So you have to, and let me just say, I had this problem with highly compensated lobbyists. People would come to the office and 20 minutes into a 30-minute meeting, I'd have to lean forward and say, well, gee, Bob, it's really good to see you, but how can I help you today? Now that's code for Bob. You've been here 20 minutes. We only have 10 minutes left and I have no idea what it is you want. Now, what Bob could have done, and I would argue should have done, is walk in and say, hi, Senator, good to see you. Listen, I've got a bill coming up, SB 327. It's a renewable energy bill. I know you're big on renewable energy issues. It's in front of the Energy Committee next week, and I'm hoping we can count on your vote. Now that took 15 seconds. Now we can talk about whatever we want to talk about. He can make the case for the bill. He can tell me who's for it. He can tell me who's against it. He can tell me why it's consistent with the legislation I've carried to, create more renewable energy. But I know why he's there. He wants my vote on a renewable energy bill next week. And I can maybe even in real time say, Bob, I can't commit, but until I've heard all the testimony, but I can't imagine why I'd have a problem with it. I think you should count me as an aye vote until and unless you hear otherwise. Or I can say, oh, I hadn't paid attention to that one. Thank you for bringing it to my attention. I will. Same for you as community members and activists. If you when Bob Sublette walks up to the microphone, he's going to say, council, he's going to look at Annie and Virginia and all the rest of the council. He's going to say, council, we've already got too much traffic going too fast in my neighborhood. Somebody's going to get killed. So either mitigate the traffic or deny the project. Now, again, that took maybe 20, 30 seconds at most. He's still got 2-3 minutes left. If he wants to tell a heartwarming story, do. If he wants to open up his binder full of data on traffic issues, he can. If he wants to talk about how the city's going to be liable, he can. But everybody on that council knows what he wants. Fix the traffic or deny the project. So again, ask yourself before you walk in the room, what is it I want? Because you can't get what you want till you know what you want. Then tip number 6 is bring solutions. And by this, I mean, look, we've all heard candidates for office, including incumbents, who say, elect me, I want to take on the tough challenges of our community. Let's be candid. Nobody wants hard problems tossed on their desk. Hard problems are hard, and they're going to make people angry. What people would really like is if you show up with a solution. So ask yourself before you show up, have I done the work? Have we done the work to create solutions? So if Sue Abbey is going to walk in the room, she could say, I've got a real thorny one for you, in which case the council members are going to go, no, thank you. Or she could say, council member so-and-so, this has been an issue in our neighborhood for a long time. We did a lot of work. We got together at the community center. We had some neighborhood coffees, and we got to a place where we're really at consensus. And in fact, we've gone through the neighborhood and we've got a petition signed by 93% of the folks in the neighborhood who all we need is a zoning overlay from the city. And the council member is going to be thinking, great, 93%. When was the last time I got to make 93% of the people happy with one action? And I don't have to do all the hard work. Sue and her folks already did it for me. If you bring solutions rather than problems, you are far more likely to be successful in your advocacy. And smart, good going, Sue. Good for you. Then part of that, I would say, is in tip number 7, describe the elements of a solution rather than insist on your solution. And again, I would tell you, when I went to Sacramento as a new legislator, we went through a training program. And, you know, one of the things I heard over and over again was, don't fall in love with your bills. Now, what did that mean? Well, it means just what they said, don't fall in love with your bills. And I have to tell you, I was horrible at this. I fell in love with all my bills, because if it was a Semidian bill, I was sure it was the perfect solution to whatever the problem was. But what they were trying to tell us as newcomers to the legislature is there's more than one way to get to yes. There's more than one potential solution. So if you insist on your solution, you have limited rather than expanded the possibilities of success. And Bob, there was a guy, maybe he lived in your neighborhood, who came to the city council years ago. I remember it very well. And he walked up to the microphone and he was very clear. So he knew what he wanted. He told us, he said, council members, I want a traffic barrier in front of my house. And I remember in real time thinking, really? You woke up this morning and thought, I want a big, ugly hunk of concrete with sticks coming out the side right in front of my house. Well, when you probe a little and said, you know, is that really what you're interested in? No, like you, he was concerned about the fact that there was too much traffic going too fast and it was putting people at risk. So then we started to have a conversation about, well, is there another way to address that besides a traffic barrier? Because if it's a traffic barrier or nothing, you know, it's a binary choice, right? Thumbs up or thumbs down. He can win or lose. And we've only got one path to success. But once we started talking, you know, it turns out Annie says, well, what about changing the speed limit? And Virginia says, what about a stepped up enforcement? And Susan says, what about one of those flashing signs that says slow down? And Winifred says, what about some traffic calming devices? And Kathy says, what about making it one way? And John says, what about putting up some stop sign? And all of a sudden, we've got a half a dozen or a dozen different ways to get to yes that magnify, multiply the possibility. So, you know, we often have an idea and get attached to it. We fall in love with our bills, when what we should be doing is saying, let me tell you what my interest is. My interest is in keeping people safe on the street. And if there's another way to do it, I'm open to that, says Bob Sublette, because he wants to solve the problem, not win the argument or insist on his solution. Now, tip number 8, this is the only time I'm going to ask everybody on the call to unmute. So I'm going to just give you a second. Everybody, please unmute. You remember where that unmute button is. And I'm going to count to 3, and I'm going to ask you to read along tip number 8 if you have your tips handy. And I'll read it aloud with you at the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Do not chastise, threat, member or his or her staff. 3. You can now put your mute buttons back on again. I wanted to hear everybody actualize that, to hear you say it. And here's the reason why. Everybody chuckled like, surely no one would do that. And I want to assure you, they do. It happens all the time. And again, it's because we care, we're passionate, we see something that offends our sensibilities, we get angry. I know I do. But if you chastise, insult, or threaten the members or their staff, that makes you a less effective advocate. And I want to be clear, I'm sharing this tip with you, not because I would ever presume to tell you how to behave or that you should be nice people or have good manners. This is a very practical consideration. You will be, as I said, disappointed, angry, upset, but you know, if you let loose, it will damage your effectiveness. Years ago, I remember telling my wife, you know, I'd really like to tell so-and-so that, you know, what I think. And she said, well, you could do that, honey, but that would be self-indulgent. And I said, well, what do you mean? And she said, well, you'll feel good for 5 minutes, and then you will have irrevocably lost the ability to be effective on the issues that you say you care about that affect the people that you tell me you're there to serve. And she was absolutely right. So, I do see this in the public venue all the time. The classic is, the person who's there at the school board meeting at 1:45 in the morning, wagging their finger at the school board and saying something like, you people, which is never a good start to a conversation, right? You people on the school board obviously don't care about the children. Well, let me tell you what the school board members are thinking. They're thinking, really, it's 1:45 in the morning. I could be at home. I do this job basically for free. I care deeply about the children in our schools. And by the way, I don't think I've ever seen you volunteer for anything, you who are wagging your finger at us on the school board. And the irony is the next part of the sentence is, and I want your help with, and of course, everybody is pinned back in their chair. They are not leaning in to help. They're leaning away because they don't want any part of this aggravation. You have essentially pushed them away by finger wagging and chastising. So you don't want to go down that path. It will make you less effective. In a city situation, I think if any of you work in a city environment, you may know one of the worst jobs in my view is the junior planner, the poor planner who has the job of staffing the desk when somebody comes in with their plans. And of course, people who come in with their plans want what they want. And the poor planner has to say, gee, I'm sorry, but that's not up to code, or that's inconsistent with our city rules. And what happens is people lose their temper and they suddenly get angry and they clench their fists and they may even slam them down on the desk and say, I know the mayor. Now, let me tell you what the junior planner is thinking. The junior planner is thinking, good for you. And then your plans, which were at the top of the pile finally, get buried at the bottom of the pile. And then the junior planner tells the senior planner, and the senior planner tells the city manager, and the city manager mentions it to the mayor, and the mayor says, I don't even know that guy. And then the mayor mentions it to the rest of the council. So if you ever do get to the council finally, you have created a toxic environment for yourself, which it will be very hard to work your way through. So again, I'm offering up this tip, not because I'm presuming to tell anybody, I wouldn't, how they should behave or carry themselves through life. I'm telling you, you will be a less successful advocate. And if you have to count to 10, take a deep breath, walk out of the room, come back 5 minutes later, whatever your tool is, I would encourage you to use it, because you're going to want to stay in a place where you are effective rather than vent to your detriment. Tip number 9, understand that sometimes less is more. And look, will all 9 members of the city council or all 7 members of the planning commission say the same thing over and over and over again and then vote unanimously? Yes, they get to, they were appointed, they were elected. But, if you have 30 people, you have to ask yourself, do we really want them all to say the same thing 30 times in a row? The first thing we know is keeping message discipline with 30 people is tough. We also know that not all 30 are going to be as well spoken as the 2 or 3 best of the batch. So if you've got 2 or 3 folks, don't let a parade of folks get in the way of communicating crisply and leaving time for an actual solution, and risk putting off the folks whose help you need up there on the council or on the board. Understand that sometimes less is more. I had 500 folks turn out, God bless them, to help me save a mobile home park for folks here in my community a few years back at the Buena Vista Mobile Home Park. And we were all there at the rally at City Hall. It'd been a long time since I had organized a rally. I'm used to people organizing rallies in my direction, but I wanted to make the case to our local city council they should support retaining this affordable housing. And then we had a decision to make, which is who speaks and how many. And we made the judgment that 3 people out of 500 should speak, and I was not one of them. And we pulled our 500 people into the chambers, which only holds 250. So it was quite a sight. 3 people spoke, then the 500 swept out, and every member of that council knew that those 500 people could have chosen to speak. And let me assure you, they were quite eloquent in their presence, even if they did not speak in the moment. So remember that sometimes less is more. Having said that, I want to encourage you to layer your campaign, by which I mean this. So I'm looking at Councilmember Agnes now, and I'm thinking, all right, if we were trying to lobby Councilmember Agnes to do the right thing, how might we do that? Well, we could send her a letter. Okay, where are we going to send the letter? Well, we could send it to City Hall. Maybe she gets it, maybe she doesn't. Maybe she reads it, maybe she doesn't. If she lives in the city, which she has to be on the council, we could maybe send it to her home address if we had that. Now we've got 2 tickets in the lottery. That's good. And maybe she works full-time outside the home, so we could send it to her workplace. And now we've got 3 opportunities to get to her. And you know, it is the 21st century, so we could send it by email, even though not everybody is great about reading their email. But we're coming at her from different paths, right? We're not only getting her one way, we're getting her another way. We're putting one on top of the other. And then if we've already written this, you know, why don't we send it to the local newspaper as well? And, you know, if we've written a couple of drafts, maybe we could get a couple of our friends to send in a copy as well. And so now we got 3 letters to the editor in the local newspaper. And, you know, by the way, I think that the council member is a member of the Rotary Club, and you know, why don't we call the program chair there and see if we can get one of our speakers there. And here's what happens. Councilmember Agnes reads the letter she gets, then she opens the newspaper and sees the 3 letters and thinks, oh my God, the whole community is ablaze. Really, it's just you and your 2 friends who know how to push the send button. Okay. And then she goes to Rotary, where she thinks she can just relax and be with some friends, shoot the breeze, feel a little important. And all of a sudden she's hearing about the same issue again from the speaker at the Rotary Club, because you layered your campaign. Think about how when something is advertised, a consumer product, you don't just hear about it on the radio, you see it on the TV, you see it online. I remember an advertising campaign for a Snickers bar where they had illuminated Snickers on the top of the cab that went by in front of me. And I thought, I don't even like Snickers, but boy, do I know that they're out there right now and they want me to buy a Snickers. So you want to come in on several levels. Tip number 11 is persistence pays off. And I'm just going to sort of randomly ask Meg Snowden. Meg, do you know that it is against the law in California to hold a handheld cell phone to your ear while you drive your car?
Yes, I'm aware of that.
Okay. Now, Meg, do you happen to know who wrote that bill?
No idea.
Take a guess. That would be me, Meg.
That's my guess, yes.
Okay, there you go. So the reason I'm mentioning that is because I introduced that bill my first year in the state legislature, and I couldn't get it out of committee. So I introduced it my second year in the legislature, and I still couldn't get it out of committee. And I introduced it my third year in the legislation, and I failed again. And I tried in my 4th year, and I failed again. And I tried in my 5th year, and I failed again. And the staff in my office said, Joe, you might want to think about letting this go. You're starting to look a little bit foolish. And I said, no, I think it's important. And so I tried again. And in my 6th year, the 6th attempt at a pretty simple, straightforward bill, I was finally successful. And the bill passed, was signed into law by the governor. And the first year after the bill became law, we had 700 fewer fatalities on California's highways, 20% drop in the number of deaths on our highways. And that is my proof to you, Meg, that persistence pays off. If it's important, you got to stay at it. Big ideas are even tougher. So I happen to be the author of the legislation that required 20% renewable energy in California by the year 2010, and then 33% renewable energy by the year 2020. I can assure you it took years. On the 33% bill, one year we got the bill to the governor and he vetoed it. Following year, the bill died on the floor of the Senate with literally 8 minutes left on the clock, and we just didn't have time. And then the year after that, we finally got a bill to the governor. New Governor Brown signed the bill. But it took 6 years to get that one bill passed. I don't know if there's a magic to 6 years, but persistence pays off. And even if you think you have won, you are not yet done. Because you remember that recycling center we got the council to pony up some money for? Well, guess what? Next year, you have to fight for that money again because it's an annual budget. And the fact that we were successful in getting the money for the recycling center has empowered some other folks who think, hey, if they can get money, I can get money. Except it turns out the money they want is yours, or you thought it was. So you have to be persistent and keep showing up. Persistence pays off. Tip number 12 is make it easy to say yes. And in many ways, that's what all these tips are about. Whenever you're about to make a move, ask yourself, I see Samantha nodding, ask yourself, am I making it easy for them to say yes? If you stand at the microphone and say, Kathy Down, you are obviously in the developer's pockets. Well, you've made it harder, not easier, for her colleagues to vote with you, because they don't want to be associated with somebody who's trash talking their colleague. They're going to need Kathy's vote next week, next month, next year. If you take the most important issue and put it on the 18th page of your 30-page document, you haven't made it easy. All due respect to Susan, hell, we can't get her to read the first sentence in the first paragraph of the first page. So you put it on page 18 of a 30-page document, not going to happen. That's why your 13 tips are literally on one page. It is a one-pager so that it's all in one easy place. Ask yourself, have you made it easy rather than hard? I had folks, my first year in the legislature, constituents who wanted to talk to me, and they called to say, we're driving up from the peninsula. It's 125 miles up, it's 125 miles back, but we want to talk to then Assembly Member Simidian at 2 o'clock on Monday afternoon. And my office had to say, gee, I'm sorry, but he's not available. And they said, well, what do you mean? We're his constituents. We're going to drive 250 miles round trip. And my staff said, well, on Monday afternoon from 1:30 to 3:30, he's in the Revenue and Tax Committee. He's also in the Transportation Committee. He's also in the Utilities and Commerce Committee. And while we figured out how to get him to 3 places at once, we really do know we can't get him to 4 places at once. Did those folks make it easy or hard? They made it hard because they only had a half-hour window on a particular day. If they had said, look, we're going to come up Monday and Tuesday, we'll be there from 10 to 6 both days, and we get a half an hour. Well, now they've made it pretty easy to say yes, we can find a time, and they made it pretty hard to say no. So ask yourself at every step, have you made it easy to say yes? And the final tip I want to share with you is the value of a thank you. And again, this is about advocacy. This is not about good manners, although it is good manners. You know, in today's world, we're all very, very busy. If you're activists, you're doubly busy. And we sometimes forget to say thank you. And what I want to tell you is that will make you a less effective advocate. When we reached out to the council to get that funding for the recycling center, and they said yes, well, that's 9 people who did us a favor because they did the right thing, which they should. But it also means they had to turn down 3 other community groups who are now mad at them that they didn't get the funding. So I think we better write them a thank you note, because we're going to be back next year asking for that funding again. And, you know, I know Winifred would never think this way, but some of her colleagues might say, are you kidding me? I took grief from 3 other groups I had to say no to, and you didn't bother to drop me a note saying thank you, and now you want me to do that again? Ha, not likely. Now, Winifred would never be that petty and small, but some of her colleagues might be. So let's just remember to send the thank you note. And Bob was very successful, and he got that development project defeated 5-4. But Bob, do you think that smart developer is going to be writing thank you notes to the 4 votes he got? You bet he is. And by the way, if he's really smart, he's going to be writing a letter to the 5 who voted no. Dear council member so-and-so, I was so disappointed that you voted no on my project, but I want you to know how much I appreciate the fact that you gave it your full and fair consideration. It was clear to me that you did your homework and you cared deeply about your community. I look forward to bringing you a revised project. It will be painted blue instead of green. I look forward to bringing you a revised project that is worthy of your support. Thanks so much for your public service, Dave, the developer. Because he's a smart developer and he knows that a thank you matters. And, you know, I'll just ask, I see, I believe it's Ileana Soto there. Ileana, can you think of any place besides directly to the elected official you might send your thank you letter? Is there a newspaper in your community, Ileana? You're muted, I'm sorry.
Yes, I would send a letter to the newspaper.
Because when Ileana sends the letter to the newspaper, she's not only saying thank you to the elected official, she's saying thank you to the elected official in front of that newspaper's thousands or tens of thousands of readers. And the elected official is saying that Ileana, she's not only a good person and a kind person and a person who knows to say thank you, she's a smart ally, and I want to have her with me because she's telling thousands and tens of thousands of people about the good work I did. That's the kind of ally that people want to have, and that's the kind of person they're going to want to work with again. And I'm just going to close here, Susan and James, with one last personal experience that I hope conveys the power and the value of a thank you. And it's a long ago one that has stayed with me. Literally, back in 1999, I was on the Board of Supervisors, my first go around before I went off to Sacramento for a while. And I'd been doing some work with a great group called IRC, the International Rescue Committee. And they were doing work about refugee relief and resettlement in Albania and Kosovo. And those of you who were around at the time or who are students of history may recall that there was ethnic cleansing and NATO was dropping bombs in an effort to stop the violence. And we saw hundreds of thousands of folks moving across boundaries, very sad stuff, and then trying to move back to whence they had come from. And so the folks at IRC, International Rescue Committee, asked me if I would be willing to volunteer and do some refugee resettlement and relief work in Albania and Kosovo. I said I would. I went for 2.5 weeks. And I should be very clear, I was not a big deal. I was doing grunt work on the ground. And I came back after 2.5 weeks, and I was exhausted because it was both a physically draining trip, but also an emotionally draining trip. And this is how you know it was the late 90s. I came back to work, and my staff said, look, we know you're busy, we know you're tired, we know you need to relax a little bit before you come back to the office, but we got a couple of things we got to get back to people on. The JCC, the Jewish Community Center, would like you to speak for 2 minutes among 12 speakers this Sunday at a Not in Our Town rally. And I said, well, what's that about? And they said, well, while you were gone, there were anti-Semitic phone calls made to the JCC. And so this is a rally to say, that's not who we are, not in our town. And I thought about it, and I thought, you know, I've been gone for almost 3 weeks. I haven't had a weekend with my wife in a month. I'm exhausted. It's just 2 minutes, and I'm like part of a 12-person set of speakers, and it'll be hot, and it'll last longer than they think it will. I'm being pretty negative, frankly, and then I'd say, yeah, I'll do it. So I go, and it turned out it was everything I had thought. It lasted longer. It was in a hot multi-purpose room at an old middle school. No air conditioning again. Turns out there aren't just 12 speakers, there are 13, and I am like literally number 7 in the middle. And I'm following Joan Baez, so you can imagine how big a deal I felt like I was right after hearing everybody heard from Joan Baez. But it was fine. I was glad I went. My wife was very supportive and understanding, and that was that, I thought. A couple days later, it's Tuesday, and I have one of those days that we all have when you think, can nobody act right all day long? Like, what happened today? Everybody is badly behaved. And so I left work for me early. I left about 5:30. I'm a night guy, so that's very early for me to leave the office. And I go, and again, as I say, this is how you know it's the 90s. I swing by the video store, for all of you who can remember that far back. I swing by the video store and I pick up the 2 most mindless videos I can find. I want no intellectual content. I want to go home, I want to put my feet up, I just want to relax. And I take my videos and I put them down on the counter, and they kind of rattle on the glass. And there's some young, kind of punky looking attendant with spray painted hair and piercings and kind of a torn t-shirt, and he's not paying any attention. And he doesn't even look up, and he says, name? And I said, well, Joe Simidian. And he does look up and he says, are you the Joe Simidian? And I'm being a little flip because, you know, that's not always a good question, right? So I say, that depends. Which Joe Simidian are you asking about? And he's dead on serious, and he looks right at me and he says, the Joe Simidian who spoke at the JCC this weekend. And probably because I had stereotyped him based on his looks, which was my bad, I was surprised and I said, yeah, I am. How did you know that? And he said, because I was there. And I heard what you said. It mattered a lot. It was important. Thank you. And in that moment, without intending it, and probably without even realizing it, that young guy made sure that if I was ever asked again, I would not hesitate for a moment to say yes. And that is the power of a thank you. So let me say thank you to you for the work you do and for the commitment you have. And I hope you leave tonight's conversation a little bit more successful as advocates, because the work that you all are trying to make happen is tremendously, tremendously important. Thank you very much. Thank you, Susan. Thank you, James. And thank you all, as I say, for the work you do.
Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
I see I've run a little long. I'm told that happens from time to time, but if we have time for 1 or 2 questions, Susan, that's great. And if not, I understand.
Sure, we have some time. Thank you very much for joining us tonight and for sharing your experiences and your advice with us in a very engaging way. We do have time for a couple questions. And if you want to put them in the chat or just go ahead and start talking if you had a question.
Susan, do you want to try and moderate and pick a question?
Yeah, I don't see any questions. There was one question we're actually, Geeta's going to give a little presentation on how some, especially project planning works in the city and county. But there was a question that says, what's the best way to find out who the right person to talk to is? Just government can be very confusing. And so we're going to try to help a little bit with that tonight.
Good. The only thing I would say before you go into that session about this is, it used to be tough pre-Google, but now, if your issue is housing, you Google the Palo Alto City Council and housing, and up will pop, the stories that tell you who's been a housing advocate, who's been a housing opponent. If it's, open space, that's what it is. But, a quick Google search is going to tell you. Used to be you had to ask your friend who used to go down to the city council meetings and watch them all until 1 in the morning. Now it's much easier than that. A combination of that and, clips from local newspapers and online publications will get you to the right person. But you'll want to know. I do think that you should probe as you have this follow-up conversation or the next part of your program. How do I find out who the right person to talk to is? Government in California is complicated. I get a lot of people when I do something called sidewalk office hours who come to ask, who should I talk to? Because they know I've been on a school board or a city council or a county supervisor's board or in the state assembly, state senate. And they say, I know you're not there anymore, but I know you also know how that works. But that's hard to do given all the multiple levels of government we have. So I think that's a smart question, and I think worth your time in conversation. Anything else, or should we let people take a breath, stretch their legs, and get on to the next one, Susan? I'm good.
Okay, well, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you. I hope it was helpful, gang.
All right. Well, we were going to break into smaller groups, and we're going to just kind of randomly pick the groups. So if I think we'll probably have groups of 6 or 7. And so just as a suggested topic, you're probably going to be in a group with different people than you were last time. So maybe just introduce yourself and where you're from again. And then maybe a topic that we might talk about is, what's your strength as an advocate? And if you have time and you want to go there, you could say, what do you want to work on? But that's up to you if you want to pick that. So I'm going to set up the breakout rooms, and then when we come back, I'll introduce Geeta and the topic that she's going to be talking on.
But I met all different people this time.
Right. Well, so is everybody back? I hope everybody got a chance to share. We got almost everybody in. So I promise, I apologize for not getting those 7 tips in some kind of a nice handy form, but we will definitely do that. And so next up, Geeta Dev is going to introduce kind of the city planning process and where activists can get involved in impacting what they're doing, especially development projects. So
Shall I share screen?
Sure.
Share screen. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Hi, I'm Geeta Dev. I'm with the Loma Prieta chapter, and I chair the Sustainable Land Use Committee. And so they said, why don't you talk about this? And after Josemitian's presentation, it's hard to be as dynamic as he is, but this is a really good follow-on to what he talked about how do you work with decision makers, and why we should try to interact with the cities and the counties. Today I'll just talk about the cities and the counties, and I'll try to do this quickly within the 10 minutes that we have left. But it may, we may go over 1 or 2 minutes. So the structure is sort of like this. Within cities, and the counties are very similar. So the citizens interact with the city council. And under the city council are a number of appointed boards, which, they are the Planning Commission, the Parks and Rec Commission, the Bike and Ped Commission, Pedestrian Commission, the Complete Streets Commission, a number of commissions which are appointed. But you have a city manager's office, and then under the city manager are all the staff. So here's the thing to remember. The city council and the mayor, or the board of supervisors in the case of the county, these positions are elected, and they run for office every 4 years, and they rotate. They do every 2 years there's an election. However, the committees under them are appointed. They're appointed usually by the council or the board of supervisors. And if you are interested in serving on these, you can volunteer for them. You can put your name in because they'll put out a public call. Now, usually it'll go to people who they know are already interested. But we have had several students who have then served on commissions. They served on the transportation mobility, Bike and Ped. They serve on the Pedestrian Commission. They serve Sustainability Commission, very much so. Climate action committees. These are, we've had some who have been on the Planning Commission, and Planning Commission is very good as a step towards being on city council, because then you understand land use issues. Now, the staff are very important, and it's a really good idea to get in touch with the staff who's working on a project that you are interested in or an issue that you're interested in. And some of them are more accessible and some are less accessible, but it's really, really good if you can develop somebody at each of these levels on an issue that you're interested. Now, why do we want to interact with them? The easy way is the short term. There's a particular issue that comes up and we want to interact on that. But I can tell you that after a while, you realize that it's the long range ones that are really, really important, because that is where the policies are set. By the time the project is a short-term project, sometimes it's too late, because they're using the policies and the goals to set the short-term project. So the staff have already worked on it. They're using the long-range goals, and I'll come to that in a minute. But many times there are environmental issues that we get involved in. There's issues related to creeks, habitat, urban canopy. Things come up. Right now I'm working on a project where some citizens have come to us and said they're going to build these, they're going to add double the number of apartments, and they're going to cut down all these trees. Can you do something about it? So, we get involved in it and say, now, wait a minute, this is a habitat corridor. I don't think this is a very good idea. So then you work with them and you work with the council on trying to look at it from the point of view of habitat rather than apartments. So the way that the city councils work is they have the city council, every city in California is required to have a general plan. And the general plan is revised every few decades, every 20 years, 30 years or so. Sometimes 15 years, they do amendments. And the councils will, and the commissions will base their decisions on the policies and goals that are articulated in the general plan. So if your city is doing a general plan, and several cities are working on general plans right now, and I'll tell you why, this is a good thing to be involved in, because if you can influence like right now, climate is a real serious issue. It's in the news all the time. It's not in most general plans. So this is a good time to bring up issues like that are timely, because general plans are slow moving and they need to change. Now, in the general plan, when you interact with it, you'll find that there are these required elements. The state requires that these issues be covered. And this is very good. Environmental justice was added most recently, like 2 years ago. But if you look at them, we are interested in several of these. Certainly number 4, conservation. Certainly number 5, open space, often on an issue of noise. Definitely item 2, circulation. We're always trying to figure out how to get more people on bicycles and walking rather than driving. And land use is central. Like with the Bay, we're very concerned about development right up against the Bay. We'd be very interested in how to use natural adaptation along the edge of the Bay rather than build condominiums along the edge of the Bay. So we care about a number of these issues. Now, you'll sometimes find that cities have a general plan. So every city has a general plan. Some cities have specific plans. Lots of cities have specific plans. Some cities have lots of specific plans. City of Sunnyvale has currently 3 ongoing specific plans. Mountain View has several. The specific plan is shorter term. It will take a certain geographic area. Right here on this picture, you can see Redwood City's downtown. They took their downtown and they did a precise plan for the downtown in which they had a very new vision for it. They really looked at it as a mixed use, revitalize their downtown area. They did a different kind of zoning. So a specific plan is a very interesting time to get involved in plan because it's much more understandable. It's something you can really get your hands into. If you look at the diagram in the corner, which shows a plan of the downtown, all those colors represent different land uses. So you can see how granular they got. So specific plan is something we are working on right now with Sunnyvale at the Moffett Park area, East Palo Alto in the Ravenswood area, South San Francisco, San Mateo. They're all doing revisions to specific plans. Now, in addition to that, there are these other things, these ordinances and design guidelines. Now, ordinances can be, just about abandoned vehicles or overgrown weeds, but there are really important ordinances like creek setback ordinances that are crucial for us. If there's an ordinance, it's a strong line they've drawn in the sand. You cannot cross this line. People do all the time, and they try to, but you have a good leg to stand on when you are talking about an ordinance. Bird safe design ordinances is what we would like to see. We are getting a lot of design guidelines on them, but we would like to see them as ordinances. Dark sky ordinances, lighting at night, light pollution. Now, we do have a lot of design guidelines, and they are also very important because you lean on them when you're saying, like right now, we are fighting a project in San Jose, which is going to be an office building that's 2 blocks long, one single building, 2 blocks long with 4 stories of underground parking right along a river, overshadowing a park. But the design, it is in violation of all the San Jose design guidelines, but they're still supporting it. However, we can argue against it. So design guidelines are also important. And we've been like the city forest plan, we worked with San Jose staff on that to get native trees in there, to get the parking lots to have more trees in them. So, you can really get involved in all of these issues. So I'm bringing these up because you can get involved in all of these issues. And finally, I would just want to mention that CEQA, the Environmental Quality Act, is a tool that environmentalists often use to deal with issues related to habitat, biology, hydrology, water, noise, and so forth. So if any project has the potential to create damage, any large project will cause traffic, for example, which causes greenhouse gases, which causes climate consequences. So they often require an environmental impact report. Now, what's important about an environmental impact report, which it took me a long time to figure out, was the reason you do it is that every significant impact is supposed to discuss how you're going to mitigate it. If you're going to build this huge building that's going to overshadow a park or traffic that's going to create problems, then you should talk about how to lessen that impact. And that's often when we can think about it and offer, as Sumitian says, what are other possible solutions? Should you slow down traffic or should you stop the project? So they'll look at how to slow down traffic. The EIR, just so you know, the Environmental Impact Report, which is required by the CEQA, there are 2 points which you can interface with it. You can comment at the beginning when they say they're going to prepare it, and you can suggest things that should be studied in it. As for example, you can say that, for example, we just said that if a project is very near the bay, then the traffic, the toxic brake dust and tire dust and exhaust fumes, particularly the dust, will get washed into the stormwater, which is then going into the bay. So you need to mitigate for that. You need to think about that. The second point you can comment on an EIR is they do a draft, they put it out there, and they give you usually about a month to 45 days to comment on it. And when you make a comment, they have to respond. It's required that they respond and give a reason why they need to either do it differently or why they are fine just the way they are. Now, I know I'm going through this very fast, but I do just want to go through this. As we talked at Sumitians, when can you interact with these decision makers? At every meeting of a city council or supervisors meeting or a planning commission meeting, you have public comment. Everyone requires public comment. It can be very short. It can be 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, but they will do public comment unless it's a study session or something special. Agendas are posted online, so you can see what the staff has to say, what the staff's going to say about the project, and then you can make a comment. And you can sign up to be notified about meetings, by the way. And you can also do the same thing at various commissions and committees, but it's more difficult because you'd have to contact staff to find out when they meet and have them notify you. And you can also, so you can stand up and have your say at these meetings, but you can also request personal meetings with individual officials or with staff. This is perfectly reasonable so that they can hear how you look at it, as Sumitian points out. So there are many ways to do this. You can also submit a letter in advance. You can send emails. You can ask your friends to send emails. You can ask other, committee members in your committee to send emails. You can send letters to the editor, as Joe mentioned. Now, you can write an op-ed if you are serving in a committee. Like, let's say our group decides to write an op-ed. If if it's reasonable, they will consider publishing it. Usually they'll publish it along with an opposing position op-ed also. You can, within our chapters, you can send an action item around to all the members to say, please send in an email or come and make a comment. On Nextdoor, you can inform your neighbors. There's very good conversations on Nextdoor. And then this is a big issue. You can learn to use social media more effectively, and we should all learn to do that. So you can take, or you can take an action. Like we had someone who decided that they wanted solar panels, and they decided to check with every city and see which, what were the roadblocks that cities had, how much did you have to pay, how long did it take. They wrote an article and had it published in the newspaper and did a press release. And had a meeting with the press, and it shamed several cities into changing their policy. This was something that an individual member of our chapter took on. It was very effective. So there are many ways decision makers can hear from you. They need to hear from you because otherwise they won't know your point of view because others are talking to them. And if you can provide them with actual useful information and data that they did not know, they will find it really worthwhile to talk to you. So just think about it that you, in fact, can make a difference. And you just have to figure out, as Samitian said, what it is that you want, and then decide how you want to go about it and how to layer it. Thank you. And I know that this is a lot, but we will be dealing with this as we go along. We're going to take 3 case studies up. We will talk about how to do it in this, from this point of view. All of these items will come into play. So, we'll be going over this again and again.
Thank you, Geeta.
Okay.
There was, I think, Terry, did you have your hand up just a second ago? Do you have a question?
I think I was just clapping.
Oh, that's a
thank
okay.
you.
Thank you. Thank you, Geeta.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry we ran short on giving much time for questions, but that was great job, Geeta. Thank you.
Good. And I think, I think a lot of our questions will be answered as we take on case studies, and we'll say, okay, remember what Geeta said? We can do all these different things. Which of these should we do? And there are more things. We'll brainstorm, how else can you do it? How better can you do it?
And I will send along with the recordings to the whole roster. I'll send along a copy of Geeta's presentation.
Oh, okay, good. Yeah, I'll send you a PDF.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you,
tonight.
everyone. It was an awesome meeting. I loved Samitian. Wow.
So yes, so one thing to look for me in the next week is I'll be sending around signups for our site visits. So just let me know if you have any questions. I'll be sending that out in the next day or two for people to sign up. So thank you very much tonight for joining us.
Dan, could you also please talk about our assignment for next week, the one we're supposed to watch the video and where we might find it?
You know what? I will send out another copy of the calendar, and there's links in the calendar. So thank you for reminding me. And that you can find it on our website, but I've got it's got a link that goes right to the right spot on the video. So I will send that out I can send that out tonight to everybody.
Okay. Well, I have the calendar and I didn't find any link.
Yeah, no, I'll send you out a newer version of the calendar.
Oh, okay. Perfect. Thank you. Thanks.
And do look for the information in the email for signing up for the outings. So.
But I want to welcome all the new people who joined this time. I know that there was a waiting list. We're sorry about that. But because some people said that they couldn't make it for whatever reason, we were able to let everyone else in. So welcome. We're really delighted to have you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you all.
It's a great
Thank
meeting.
you, Susan.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thank
Susan.
you.
Thank you, Geeta.
Thanks, Susan. Good night.
Bye.
Night.
Bye.